A smug grin spread across his face, as if he'd just broken wind in the throne room, as he said, "Olivia Bennet, this isn't a nursery. It's a business. Maybe you should focus on that before trying to squeeze in diaper changes between board meetings." And just like that, right there in conference room B, under the flickering LED that buzzed like a dying mosquito, everything inside me froze. Not anger, not shock, just absolute silence. I felt the blood drain from my face, like it had more important things to do than hang around. Because this wasn't the first time Ethan Hayes had humiliated someone for fun. But it was the first time he'd picked on the wrong woman. The wrong mother. The room held its breath. No one made eye contact, everyone staring intently at their laptops. Suddenly, everyone was extremely interested in Google Docs and the texture of the conference table. I didn't say a word. Just clicked my pen twice. It was my signal. It meant, duly noted. You're going to regret this. Click. Click. What they didn't know, what he didn't know, was that I'd been building a dossier on him for 6 weeks. I'd anticipated this. The snide remarks, the barbed comments, the jokes about pregnancy brain and ticking time bombs. HR had been feigning deafness to the quiet murmurings of discontent for years. So, when my initial complaint vanished into the ether, I wasn't surprised. But I wasn't naive enough to go into battle unarmed. Every Tuesday at 9 a.m., my phone meticulously recorded every sound. Every deleted Slack message, every screenshot, every snarky red pen edit on my maternity leave proposal, all printed, digitally signed, and dispatched to 3 dummy email addresses under the names Brenda, Beatrice, and Evelyn. My unborn child was surrounded by more legal protection than our entire compliance department combined. But none of that compared to what I discovered 2 days later. Hidden in the depths of the shared drive, casually filed among the Q2 vendor contracts, was a spreadsheet ominously titled Alpha Restructure, composed by Ethan Hayes himself. It was a blacklist. My name was third from the top. Next to it, like a sentence, was scrawled, probationary, high risk, reputational loss. Recommend preemptive termination before increased HR liability. He planned to get rid of me before I even went on leave. I stared at the treacherous spreadsheet, blinking so fast the letters seemed to go haywire, swirling in a mad dance. And then I did something that teetered between madness and genius, I still can't decide which. I simply emailed the file to a friend at the Department of Labor. No subject line, no explanation, just raw, unadulterated evidence. Then I printed a copy, sealed it in an envelope, and hid it behind a dog-eared copy of What to Expect When You're Expecting on my desk, as if it could protect me. That afternoon, after lunch, Ethan Hayes summoned me to his office. He had that smug, seasoned corporate wolf grin plastered across his face again, like he was about to generously offer me hush money in exchange for my silence. But when I walked in, there was already a guest. A woman in a severe gray suit, with cold eyes and a federal badge clipped to her hip like a weapon. An open notepad lay before her. Not a hint of a smile. Ethan Hayes instantly paled, white as a sheet. And I couldn't help but return a triumphant smile. "Olivia Bennet," she said, giving a barely perceptible nod in my direction. "Please, have a seat. Mr. Hayes was just telling me about how supportive this company is of expectant mothers." And just like that, the game had flipped on its head. And it wasn't even halftime yet. Ethan Hayes was silent for a full 11 seconds. I counted them, holding my breath. His jaws worked like he was trying to chew through a cobblestone. For the first time, the smug tech bro had lost all his swagger. The woman, Agent Michelle Green from the Department of Labor's Whistleblower Protection Unit, unclasped her folder, so thick it could bury any lawsuit. She slid a few printed Slack transcripts across his glass desk, like laying out tarot cards, foretelling corporate doom. "This is from May 3rd, she said, her voice even. "Let her take time off for mood swings, but don't expect her to come back with the same productivity. The rod spreads quickly. You sent this to Mr. Levinson." Ethan Hayes's face first turned crimson, then almost translucent. He swallowed, trying to find his voice. That was sarcasm. Obviously, he stammered, throwing his hands up in a gesture of helplessness. Michelle Green didn't even raise an eyebrow. You used company communication to describe a pregnant employee as, and I quote again, dead weight in a maxi dress. He searched my gaze for any spark of understanding, as if hoping I would laugh off this nightmare, tell him he simply misspoke. As if the last 3 months hadn't forged me into a silent soldier. I forced a smile. I'm just an observer here. But I omitted that I was also a victim. After all, I was the one who stirred up this mess, initiating the investigation. And I was smart enough to cover my tracks, removing my name from the official complaints. You can't go to war with an angry letter in hand. First, you sick the feds on them. By the end of the meeting, Ethan Hayes was drenched in sweat, as if he'd just been doused with a bucket of water, and stuck to his designer chair. Green promised to return next week with a representative from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. He was left alone with a box of printed messages that looked like they'd been soaked in kerosene and were about to be set ablaze. HR tried to remain neutral, but I could feel the shift in their attitude toward me. I was no longer just a headache. I had become a fire alarm. After that, the office turned icy. Emails went silent. Doors stopped swinging open. Suddenly, my protégés became elusive. But I no longer needed allies. I needed immunity and power. So I took a leave of absence, officially and without scandal. The company released a vague statement supporting my life choices and offered a ridiculous 3-month severance package. I refused. Instead, Veronica, my lawyer, a former prosecutor with a computer-like memory and maniacal precision, prepared a lawsuit. The settlement was lightning fast. 7 figures. They made me sign a non-disclosure agreement so draconian that I was afraid to even mutter the amount in my sleep. Fine. Money wasn't my main goal. Not entirely. It was just fuel for the next stage. After all, what those idiots didn't know was that in the very week that Ethan Hayes crushed me in the boardroom, another letter appeared in my inbox. From a recruiter acting confidentially. They were looking for a vice president of compliance at a rapidly growing tech company. New field, higher salary, broader prospects. I said no. 6 months later, that same company acquired my former one, and the offer was repeated. Vice President of Regulatory Compliance. This time, I accepted. I didn't even have to change offices, just 1 floor up. On my first day, I rode the elevator and walked past my old desk. Now, another person was sitting there, a young analyst in bright pink headphones, chewing gum with gusto, as if the world belonged to her alone. Well, I thought, she'll need that energy. Finally, my new office. A huge desk, a real door, and a nameplate already screwed into the door. Olivia Bennett, Vice President of Regulatory Compliance and Ethics. A welcome packet awaited me on the desk. Inside, a report on corporate policy, where some names were marked in red. And guess whose name topped that list? When I first summoned Ethan Hayes to my office, he didn't recognize my assistant's voice when she announced, "Olivia Bennett will see you now." He burst into the office as if he was about to deliver a sentence to a negligent subordinate. Phone in hand, shirt unbuttoned so provocatively that it was almost embarrassing. Not a shadow of a doubt that the air around him would now thicken to the limit, ready to break his confidence like a matchstick. But then he looked up and froze in place. I didn't smile, didn't jump up. I just slowly, pointedly casually flipped through the pages of the quarterly audit report, as if I wasn't blowing up his world of power with just the nameplate on my desk. "Close the door, Ethan," my voice sounded even, but there was a steely firmness ringing in it. His mouth opened, closed, and opened again, like a fish thrown onto the shore. Sorry, I thought I should." "Should," I echoed. "Have a seat." He lowered himself into the chair as if it might bite him. Silence hung in the office, broken only by the monotonous ticking of the clock. Tick-tock, tick-tock, like counting down to an impending catastrophe. I looked him straight in the eye, not looking away. "Let me be clear right away," I said, and every word sounded like a hammer blow. This is not a settling of scores. This is a compliance check. And your department is highlighted in red for 3 key violations: misuse of funds, signs of creating a hostile work environment, and secret restructuring proposals directed to third-party suppliers. He blinked frequently, as if trying to wake up. That was a draft. Not the final version. Nevertheless, you sent it from corporate email. 2 hours 14 minutes in the morning. Marked as extremely urgent, and a lawyer is copied. I decisively pushed the printout across the table. This is more than enough. He fidgeted in the chair, as if caught in a trap, his leg bouncing nervously, betraying his confusion. This man, who had once mocked my plans for maternity leave, now avoided my gaze as if I were holding not a folder of documents, but a death warrant. "What is this?" he muttered, almost inaudibly. "Some kind of revenge?" I leaned forward, close enough for him to catch the faint scent of eucalyptus oil emanating from my wrist. The very oil he had once ridiculed, saying I smelled like hippie birthing potion. "No," I whispered, my voice as cold as a blade. "This is the moment you finally face responsibility." Capital R. I paused, letting my words hang in the air like a poisonous mist. Then, with deliberate nonchalance, I opened my laptop and began scrolling through marked expense reimbursements. One jumped out like a neon sign in the night. $3,842.16, I said slowly, looking directly into his eyes. For employee morale boosting at a private golf resort, 2 hours away. I tapped the receipt on the screen. Only one name was listed: Ethan Hayes. As I turned the monitor toward him, I saw his face twitch. "It was team building," he mumbled, as if justifying himself. "And who was on this team?" My voice was deceptively calm. His lips moved silently, as if trying to catch elusive words. I savored the silence, thick and oppressive, like a surgeon's scalpel. Then, without taking my eyes off his face, I opened another tab and launched an audio file. "Wait," he panicked, lunging forward. I pressed play. His voice, gravelly and smug, filled the office. The recording was from one of our recent Tuesday meetings. "Seriously, we need to hire fewer women of childbearing age. The damage to the company is just colossal." I stopped the recording. Ethan Hayes looked like he had swallowed a shard of glass. "You said that in a company-wide meeting that was being recorded on Zoom, after I warned you twice about making discriminatory remarks." I didn't know it was being recorded," he stammered, avoiding my gaze. "You did," I snapped. "You just didn't care. Until today." His knuckles turned white with tension. "You set this up. You planned this." "I planned to survive," my voice was ice. "What you're feeling now is just gravity. I didn't push you off the cliff. You walked to the edge yourself, screaming at the top of your lungs." He stood up so abruptly that the desk groaned in protest against the sudden jolt. I didn't even raise an eyebrow. "Effective immediately, you are on probation. Turn in your corporate card. Your email will be under my scrutiny. And until the investigation is complete, you report directly to me." Stung, he spat. "You can't do this." I was untouchable. I lifted my chin, looking down at him, my heels added to my height, but it wasn't just that. I was sharper, more resolute, stronger, in every way that now mattered. "I'm here to change that. The exit is to your left. And close the door behind you." He left, enveloped in a silence so deafening it felt like you could hear his former grandeur evaporating. I sank into my chair, took a deep breath, and opened my inbox. The real work was just beginning. 3 hours later, my inbox was bleeding. Not literally, of course, but it felt that way. Subject lines, one after another, like wounds: concerns about Ethan, need to talk confidentially. And my personal favorite: finally, can we be honest? They crashed over me like a tsunami, raised by years of fear from those who now finally dared to speak. Women, men, interns, middle managers, and her. The former executive assistant who had left the company in 2021 after her quiet complaint was just as quietly buried by HR. Attached to the email was a PDF, the very complaint form, detailing verbal harassment. Followed by screenshots of a mysteriously revoked vacation and, as a coup de grace, an email from Ethan, sent just 10 minutes after her complaint. If your mental health is this fragile, maybe this isn't the right industry for you. I read it twice, fury boiling inside. I flagged the email for legal. Scheduled a meeting for the next morning. Internal only. Ethan was not invited. It was time to air out this stale air. The meeting was supposed to be small. A couple of executives, the compliance team, HR. But 26 people showed up. They filed into the room silently, like survivors after a shipwreck. Some avoided eye contact. Others looked like they were ready to run if anyone raised their voice. I stood before them, at the whiteboard, with a black marker in my hand and only one promise in my heart. No cameras, no protocols, no HR overseers. We're talking human to human today, hung in the air. The silence stretched, then a voice from the back of the room broke through. He used to walk me to my car. Make sure I got onto the road okay. I was 7 months pregnant. Someone else added, voice trembling, I was told not to get all estrogen Y during my performance review. A third voice, laced with bitterness, I was told I wasn't client-focused enough. A pause. When I asked why, they said my voice got too high when I was nervous. I have a stutter, by the way. Each person lit their match, and I let the fire burn. By the end of the meeting, the entire whiteboard was covered. Not just bullet points, but raw testimonies that clawed their way into your memory. Clear, repeating patterns that HR had diligently buried under layers of internal guidelines and insincere improvement plans. When everyone had left, I stayed in that room, staring at the scribbled board, processing the rot. Then I pulled out my old, worn black Moleskine, the one I started when he first made that pregnancy brain joke. I flipped to the back, wrote one word in capital letters, pattern. And underneath it, systemic. That was the key. Because no one in that building had yet grasped the truth, Ethan wasn't just a bad manager. He was a symptom of a carefully crafted system, the shadow in which the rot thrived. He flourished because the system valued his quiet damage, his ability to plausibly deny, to cloak lies in corporate routine. But now, that system had a new, dangerous enemy. The next morning, he tried to corner me in the hallway. His tone had shifted, less rage, more sickly sweet venom. You're making this personal, he hissed, invading my personal space. No, I snapped, not breaking stride. You made it personal when you treated my pregnancy like a liability. Careful, Olivia Bennett. Do you really think the company will support you when you become a liability and start costing them money? I stopped dead, turned, and leaned in so close he could only see the whites of my eyes. I am the cost, I whispered, each word laced with steel. And trust me, they've already decided I'm worth every goddamn cent. With that, I walked into the executive boardroom and slammed the first draft of the policy overhaul onto the table, a hefty tome, several times thicker than his last pathetic proposal for a raise. Mandatory bias training, clear complaint protocols, an independent whistleblower hotline, and a carefully worded clause in the revised code of conduct. Any individual under official investigation will be temporarily relieved of supervisory duties. I looked up from the draft on the screen. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. His access badge had been deactivated that morning. This wasn't the end. Not even the midpoint. As soon as Ethan's badge stopped working, the company went into what they called stabilization mode. A euphemism for, oh God, how many skeletons does this guy have? Executives started inviting me for coffee, ostensibly for support. But their eyes said something else, fear, anxiety, a dawning realization of the scale of the damage, and a desperate need for control. They weren't just afraid of Ethan's actions. They were afraid of what I knew. That's the problem with systems built to protect men like him. They don't collapse quietly. They crumble like a casino, glitz and glamour on the surface, a house of cards underneath. And when the ledgers and audit trails start to surface, the roulette wheel turns on everyone who stood by and watched. It all started with a seemingly innocuous email thread from 2 years ago. Someone in HR had flagged a concerning trend: women, like shadows, were leaving the company, department after department. The elegant euphemism non-critical attrition masked the real issue. Instead of digging deeper, management proposed a more casual dress code on Fridays. As if that could heal a gaping wound. There were only 10 replies in that pathetic thread, and Ethan was copied on 9 of them. But it was the email from the VP of Finance that made my stomach churn. His cynicism was breathtaking. We ran the numbers. Turns out, it's cheaper to settle the occasional lawsuit than to fix the rotten corporate culture. I printed that vile email and put it in a red folder labeled leverage. Then, the thunder struck. Friday, 3:07 p.m. My assistant forwarded an anonymous tip that came through the internal reporting line. Concise, chilling, you're looking in the wrong place. Check the DEI auditor consulting contracts for the past year. Someone got paid to stay quiet. Attached to the message was a PDF invoice #431D for $75,000 for external audit, verification, cultural sensitivity, and inclusivity creation. The irony was worthy of a satirist. Services rendered, strategic reassessment of the environment and elimination of friction points. Friction point elimination. For these euphemisms, the company shelled out a tidy sum to a consulting firm whose job was to identify and quietly eliminate anyone who dared to speak out about the prevailing toxic atmosphere. And my name, to my horror, was on that to-be-terminated list. I couldn't take my eyes off the damn file. The monotonous hum of the air conditioner filled my ears. My fingers gripped the edge of the desk, white with tension, threatening to break through the skin. It wasn't just some Ethan, after all. This was all sanctioned, approved, and signed off by 2 senior executives. I had irrefutable evidence in my hands, but I needed it to explode like a bomb in front of everyone. So I made up my mind. I requested a personal meeting with the CEO, Stephanie Vaughn. Perfect, meticulously calibrated, she managed to remain completely invisible during the entire crisis. She let HR take all the flack, deftly avoided responsibility, and kept silent. Powerful people know the value of waiting. When I entered her office, I brought no notes, no evidence, except for a single red folder. Without a word, I placed it on the desk. Stephanie opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the contract, then the emails. Her nostrils flared predatorily. "This is disgusting," she hissed through her teeth. "I agree," I retorted. "And illegal." She closed the folder with a soft click, and her gaze finally met mine. "What do you want, Olivia Bennett?" There was no hint of uncertainty in my voice. "I want every name on that goddamn contractor report reinstated. With full compensation, with an apology signed by your hand. I demand an independent audit from HR and a company-wide address where you, without dodging, admit that our culture is rotten to the core, and that the person who exposed this filth is now here to clean it up." Her eyebrow shot up, expressing a mixture of surprise and contempt. "Anything else?" I leaned forward, and at that moment I was the epitome of icy calm, harboring a deadly threat. "I want you to say my name. Out loud." She exhaled loudly, as if calculating every step she took. But in the end, after an agonizing pause, she nodded almost imperceptibly. 3 days later, an email circulated throughout the corporate network. "We are entering an era of absolute transparency. This company has betrayed many of its employees, and one of them has decided to return and fix what we have broken. Please join me in welcoming our new head of ethics and compliance strategy, Olivia Bennett." When my name was announced, the world turned upside down. The morning began with an avalanche in my mailbox. Hundreds of emails, some jubilant, congratulating me, others pleading for leniency. There were also those who, in complete confusion, demanded an explanation of what the hell this new appointment meant. But I shut myself off from the chaos. Instead, I opened a draft with the ruthless title Phase 3, Reconstruction. Ethan? He no longer mattered. He was just rot to be uprooted. I was going to uproot this entire rotten garden. First, I demanded HR's compliance logs for the past 5 years. Not the glossed-over reports they fed management at quarterly reviews, but the dirty, raw records buried deep within the ATR system. Records where dismissals were coded with hypocritical euphemisms, adjusted trajectory, personality conflict at separation. It took 3 hours to decipher this hypocritical language. And 10 minutes to realize the full extent of the picture that had emerged. They weren't just turning a blind eye to Ethan's antics. They had built a citadel of lies around him, a system of cover-ups where cross-referenced files cynically recorded, sensitivity issue rejected due to cost, manager's discretion retained to prioritize retention. I felt nauseous at the abomination. The decisions weren't being made by one person, but by a whole syndicate of sycophants, cleverly hidden behind the gloss of PR speeches and PowerPoint presentations. One file made me freeze. A case involving the name Priya Patel. She had sued for discrimination, claiming she had been passed over 3 times for a management position, with younger employees preferred, one of whom Ethan had once dismissively called an office golden retriever. Her case was marked, settled. No further action. The day after that entry, Priya resigned. No explanation. I looked up her name on LinkedIn. Nothing. No new job, no updates. As if she had vanished. I printed the file and stuck it to my board like hitting a panic button. Then, pulling out my phone, I dialed a number I hadn't used in 2 years. Hello, a tired, wary voice answered. Priya Patel, it's Olivia Bennett. Silence. And then, quietly, brokenly, is it about him? I exhaled. It's about all of them. That evening, we met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from my house. She looked worn out, not just older, but like life had eroded her. Like someone who had forgotten how to trust the sunlight. I was so naive, she whispered, as if the wind carried the words from the depths of her disillusionment. I believed they would protect me. And then, it was like a switch flipped. The meeting stopped, then I felt this icy coldness. Me, who was next in line for promotion, suddenly became a ghost. I was just told I didn't fit their leadership aesthetic. The phrase landed like a whip, leaving an invisible but stinging mark on her cheek. I just nodded silently, feeling a wave of anger rising inside me. Do you have the emails? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She handed me a flash drive as if it were the most precious treasure. It's all here, she breathed. And just like that, from a tiny spark, my quiet revolution began to turn into a devastating landslide of a class action lawsuit. The next 2 weeks were hell. 5 former employees found the courage to come out of the shadows. Some left without slamming the door, others were thrown out with a bang. One had emails where HR instructed that slimy Ethan on how to write up disciplinary actions to circumvent the law. Another had voice notes, and, lo and behold, a recording of a termination interview where the HR manager cynically said, "We'll deny everything if it goes to court." I built the case methodically, carefully, like loading bullets into a magazine, packing each one with lies and hypocrisy. One truth after another. And when the magazine was full, I dialed the company's general counsel. "We have 2 paths," I announced, feeling the tension thicken in the air. "Either we dig ourselves out of this hole, or we watch this nightmare unfold in federal court, turning into a deafening scandal." She blinked, as if slapped. "You're bluffing." It sounded more like desperate hope than confidence. I didn't answer, just emailed her a Dropbox link. Her eyes darted across the screen as she scrolled through the file list. Watching her face, I saw the blood drain from it, leaving only a mask of deathly pallor. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling with horror. "This could destroy us." I leaned forward, looking her straight in the eye. "No," I said firmly. "It could resurrect us. But only if you trust me to finish what I started." A minute stretched like an eternity. She was silent, fighting with herself. Then, slowly, as if overcoming an invisible resistance, she slid her phone across the table and unlocked it. Put me on the crisis management team, she said, her voice hoarse and broken. You're in. A smile touched my lips. Yes, the game was on. And the next day, I held the company's first ever all-hands meeting where every employee was allowed to speak anonymously and in real time. What poured out that day echoed through the halls, leaving an indelible mark on everyone's memory. Anonymity crashed the servers. Literally. We had to urgently increase Zoom's bandwidth during the call because more than 900 people had tuned in, current employees, former ones, those who worked remotely, those who were fired, and even those whose non-disclosure agreements hadn't yet expired. That day changed everything. We set up an online queue, erected a virtual wall where people could vent. But the flow of anonymous revelations was so turbulent that we could barely filter it. He said maternity leave is corporate vacation. The anger in the voice was palpable even through the text. I applied twice, and both times they just disappeared. Despair permeated every word. Said hiring a woman over 35 is a bad investment. The cynicism of those words burned. But then, a message, short as a punch to the gut, made me freeze. What happened to that legal intern who disappeared after the second quarter? The name Paige flashed in my head. Bright, energetic, but kind of high-strung. She was always carrying a thick reference book, like it was her bedside Bible. She interned on my team for just 2 weeks. And then, just vanished. No explanation, no goodbye, as if she'd never been there. That night, I frantically opened the HR database. Her record was there, but scrubbed clean. No exit interview, no transfer to another department. Just one short, ominous note, removed from rotation. Incompatible temperament. My stomach churned. A lump formed in my throat. With trembling hands, I opened Slack and found her old messages. Emptiness. Archived. Deleted. Everything but one. An unfinished letter addressed to the legal department, concerns regarding unregistered comments by Hayes, remained as a draft. Paige hadn't had time to finish it. I stared at those broken lines for a long time, and something inside me snapped. As if waking up, I grabbed my phone. A quick call to my lawyer, then to a journalist I trusted like myself, and finally, Paige's last known emergency contact. Her sister answered. Hearing my name, she sobbed into the phone. She told me that Paige hadn't been herself since that summer, that she was in therapy. She said that no one believed her, not even her own parents. And that she still shudders at the sound of a typewriter, because it reminds her of the day her Slack account was suddenly blocked. In that moment, I stopped playing by their rules. I pulled the emergency brake. The next morning, I stood before the board of directors. Impeccable suit, not a hint of a smile on my face. I placed a thick folder in front of each of them, a complete class action lawsuit, every redacted name, every rigged review, every hypocritical evaluation, every executive signature that made it all possible. Finally, I submitted one last file, an export of over 700 anonymous comments from that meeting, meticulously sorted, time-stamped, and ranked by severity. The silence in the room was almost palpable. And then, as if a dam had burst, board member #3, a man of mystery who hadn't uttered a word to me in 9 months, raised his hand. In his eyes, there was undisguised surprise. What do you want? He asked, breaking the oppressive silence. I walked resolutely to the center of the table, feeling a wave of righteous anger building inside me. I demand a total housecleaning, I said, enunciating each word clearly. Every executive who allowed this nightmare, either by direct action or by their criminal silence, must resign today. You give me carte blanche to restructure HR, the legal department, and internal audit from scratch. And we issue a public apology, a sincere, genuine one. Not for PR, not to sweep the scandal under the rug, but because it's the truth. In the ensuing pause, you could hear a pin drop. The tension was at its peak. Finally, board member #2, with a worried voice, said, "This will crash the market." I leaned forward slightly, staring intently into his eyes. "It already has," I replied, quietly but firmly. So, we might as well face the crash with our heads held high. The vote wasn't unanimous, but the majority was on my side. By the end of the day, 5 people had resigned, and by the end of the week, 3 more. The CEO held on to her position but gave me complete freedom to form my new team. I felt an enormous responsibility on my shoulders, but at the same time, incredible power. The battle was just beginning. Total freedom, no limitations. By the end of the week, every door, previously inaccessible, was now open to me. And on Monday morning, a call came from an unknown number. I answered, and a young voice said, "Hello, this is Paige. I heard what you did." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, as if afraid the words would dissipate into the air. "You deserved better," she said, and her voice trembled. Then she cried. "No one has ever told me that." In that moment, I realized that it wasn't just a victory. I didn't just win the game, I changed the rules. 6 months have passed. The walls around me remained the same glass, the same steel, the same pretentious moss art in the lobby, hypocritically posing as a piece of nature. But the silence, it had changed. There was no longer the oppressive fear hanging in the air. People spoke louder, laughed, and weren't afraid to ask questions. HR stopped lurking in the shadows and started communicating with employees, not avoiding them. Ethan, he disappeared. I heard rumors that he was trying to start a consulting firm. Something vague, like optimizing executive presence. But it only lasted 3 weeks. Screenshots of his disgusting Slack messages resurfaced. This time, they were attached to a viral LinkedIn post from an intern he cynically called background decoration. Taylor, the intern, ended her speech with a phrase that stuck in my mind: "Thank you for showing me what not to be." Now in HR, these cases are simply called the Hayes Files. Training modules built on his ruins. We dissect his methods down to the smallest detail, as if conducting a post-mortem examination. Not for revenge, but to build immunity. As for me, I no longer carry a moleskine. I don't need it anymore. Now I have an entire ethics department at my disposal. We track signals from informants using artificial intelligence. We work hand in hand with HR staff trained in trauma-informed care. We've created a digital platform called The Register. There, any employee can register an issue at any time and see where it's going, who's working on it, and how long it will take to resolve. No more black holes, no more disappearing complaints. And every year, on the anniversary of that terrible meeting in the boardroom when I was told it was not a kindergarten, I hold an open Q&A session. We call it Bennett Day. Employees come with coffee, some share their stories, some bring evidence. But they all bring what Ethan could never get, the truth, spoken without fear. On that very day a year ago, as the world stood still waiting for something new, fresh blood joined our team, a brand new employee. With a timid gesture, she raised her hand, as if questioning not only me, but fate itself.